Calling in from Canberra, the member for Barker, Tony Passon, about the concerns about flooding in the River Murray area. Tony, I know your days are going out of control in Canberra, but the serious problems are back in the electorate right now.
They are, and my thoughts are constantly in the electorate, albeit I'm present here in Canberra. I've been back between parliamentary sittings, Ricky, and I've spent that time touring the smaller communities along the river. My concern is attention's being given to the larger communities, Renmark, Mannum, but small communities being left behind, and that was my fear. And when I was on the ground, it was pretty real as I visited communities like Morgan, Cadell, Blanchetown, Swan Reach, Young Husband. Their concerns and their needs are ranking as third and fourth priorities, and that's just not acceptable.
When it comes to those communities, the government issued a press conference yesterday about 400 or so homes under the current flow projections. Peter Malinauskas, the Premier, told us on flow he was getting conflicting information from the Murray-Darling Basin Authority and the Bureau of Meteorology about how much is coming downstream, and that needs to be rationalised. Is that good enough?
Well, I just think this is a Premier trying to obfuscate a very obvious failure. For months we were told that we could expect 100 gigalitres by early January. We're now past 146 gigalitres, and we haven't broken into December. What I learnt yesterday, though, Ricky, which was interesting, is the federal agency responsibility for disaster management, the National Emergency Management Agency, provided a high-risk weather season preparedness briefing to key leaders of the South Australian Government on the 30th of September. So they were getting high-level briefings, and yet they weren't communicating that information to the public. I think what we've got now is a Premier who's worked out he's been caught on the hop. He hasn't appropriately warned the people of South Australia, and he's looking to blame agencies. And by the way, in a contest between the Bureau of Meteorology and the Murray-Darling Basin Authority around river flows, I would be with the Murray-Darling Basin Authority every day, because that's effectively their sole purpose, if you like. They gauge and monitor river flows every day of the year. The Bureau has far broader responsibilities, and so the specialists in this space of the Murray-Darling Basin Authority and the Premier ought to have been listening to them, and in any event, he should have been much more across this issue than he was, and he should have warned South Australians before he did, because back to those small communities I'm talking about, many of the mitigation measures now can't be undertaken because we simply don't have the resources to protect Mannum and other communities at the same time. Whereas if we'd started this mitigation work a month or 6 weeks ago when we were first warned of it, we would have been in a position to take that action.
Well, SA Power Networks, they claim they're going to try and minimise the amount of power disconnections that are happening. But Paul Roberts from the SA Power Networks says they're working on flow scenarios of potentially 250 gigalitres coming through. That's more than the state government's projecting. Is that just a business protecting all the scenarios, or is that a possibility?
I think you do need to take a cautious approach, but I don't have any confidence in the projected number of 185 now. I think we'll significantly exceed that. And by the way, at a briefing I received yesterday from the Emergency Management Agency and the Bureau of Meteorology, we are to expect wetter than usual conditions along the east coast of Australia over summer. That spells very bad news, because the predictions we have at the moment are based on the water that's already in the system. If there's unusual rainfall events, which are now predicted, that will add to the pressure. And so my call, by the way, Ricky, to SA Power Networks and to a lesser extent SA Water, is get on the ground and start talking to affected individuals. They're spending too much time conversing with respect and backgrounding the media, and not enough time talking directly to constituents. I was in Swan Reach. That community is completely confused about who and if and where they'll be cut off from electricity. I want to see the likes of SA Power Networks conducting community meetings on the issue of electricity in community, each of these communities, and then have a drop-in section the next day where people can come along and say, look, this is where I live. What's the likelihood of me being cut off? And if so, can I operate via a generator? And if I can't, where is the refuge? And that's the next point of concern here. I mean, people need to be able to flee, take refuge in their own communities, and a lot of these small communities just don't have those amenities, and the government needs a plan to do that so that people of Cadell, for example, some of whom have already been evacuated from their properties for 6 months, are now living in the caravan park. The caravan park is now about to go under, and they're saying, well, we've moved twice. We now don't know where we're going to go. That's not a good enough response. It's not a coordinated enough response. It's not a systematic response to government. And instead, I learned today there's going to be a bit of bread and circuses on the Manham Main Street where the supercars are going to lift the spirits of the local community. I mean, Premier, please, let's focus on what the community needs, not these opportunities to distract people from what needs to be done in the middle of a crisis.
Now, just speaking of the Premier, and lastly, he has said at a press conference yesterday that this is the biggest emergency South Australia's ever faced. Now, it is a dire situation for those on the Murray, but what about COVID-19?
Well, look, this is a significant challenge, and I'm pleased the Premier now realises the scope of the challenge. Whether it's the most significant challenge South Australians ever faced, I don't know. It's certainly and let's not forget the 1956 flood, which it's a significantly more damaging event than this one will be, let's pray. But the reality is the Premier at least now has been shaken into an acknowledgement that this is a significant issue and that the state needs to take significant action. I'm just disappointed that it took so long and that the action isn't appropriately calibrated. And I'll be saying more about that over coming days. But at least we've got the attention of decision makers. I'm just concerned that some of it is really lip service at the moment. I mean, $1,000 for a household for temporary accommodation. As I said, some people have already been out of their houses for 6 weeks. There needs to be a much more significant package of supports. Small businesses who employ people, large businesses employ people are being told they'll receive the same amount of compensation. I just don't think this package has been appropriately tailored to the needs of the community. We need a more nuanced approach from the Premier and his leadership team. And so far, every time I'm speaking to people, they're underwhelmed by the support they've received.
Now, sorry, you've just raised that, but I know you've got to go. But Murray Watt, the Emergency Management Minister federally, is there a role the federal government should be playing in all of this?
Of course there is. And I mean, the Minister this month was in South Australia but didn't even bother to visit any communities along the river corridor. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, you know, what does it take for a federal minister for emergency services domiciled in Queensland to come to South Australia but not visit the flood-affected regions? I think it tells us everything we need to know about what's going on here. But one thing's for sure, I'm going to keep highlighting these deficiencies because just like the recent situation where the Swan Reach bus service was told on Monday they couldn't go across the ferry, meaning that students would spend an extra hour and a half on the bus. I raised that issue and lo and behold, there's been intervention and common sense is now being applied. I said on another program recently, Ricky, and apologies for the language, but people in river communities understand that this experience is going to be shit, right? We understand that. What we don't want is the bureaucratic bullshit that comes with it. So if we can avoid that, that'd be great.
Tony, I'll let you get back into Parliament for some more colourful conversation. Thanks for joining us today on Flow.
Thanks, Ricky.